And good morning, church.
Good morning.
I do have a few things to share with y'all before we get into our message for this morning. The first is you might have noticed we don't have our partitions up, our blue, beautiful pipe and drape that we set out. I'm sure that you miss it. But that is because following this service is our church-wide day of service event. So we will be in here in the event center to share lunch together and then to get into some various service projects here at our church and for folks around our community. So you might notice we have all kinds of good things stacked up on tables over there. We are going to make 100 meal bags for folks in our community so that when they come to our church in need of food, we have a wide array of nutritious food ready to offer them. So I'm very excited that you all are here this morning. The second thing I need to make y'all aware of is that we're going to switch things up a little bit by beginning our message with an invitation. So usually we have an invitation at the close of our service. It's when Pastor Mike comes up and invites anyone who feels so led to make a profession of faith or to place membership here at our church. But I have an additional invitation for you today. So if you keep a day planner or a Google Calendar, I invite you to get that out now because you are cordially invited to celebrate our 100th anniversary celebration of this church. We are going to be celebrating on Sunday, November 24th here over in the sanctuary with a service at 10 a.m. with special music and guests and a Thanksgiving-style luncheon on that day. I don't see enough of you writing this down. You're going to want to be there. Thank you, Donna. So as we prepare for that day, you know that we are not just leaving the celebration for that day alone. We couldn't wait till November to do our celebrating, and so throughout the entire year, we have committed to serving 100,000 people as we celebrate our 100th year of life in this church. And as we prepare to reach that goal in the 11:11 service, we have spent the last few weeks talking about how we understand what serving really means. We know that service is in part those loving actions we take for the benefit of another, often at some form of sacrifice for ourselves. We know that service is not just part of the Christian life, it's at its very heart. That more than the acts we perform, it's a way of life. And that when we live according to its call, it has the power to change everything we see. And so a few weeks ago, we talked about how service helps us see God, that God's character is revealed in service as we serve a God who is constantly serving creation. And then a few weeks ago, we talked about how service helps us see our neighbor, not as someone that we're bringing God to, but someone we're partnering with, uniting ourselves with the Spirit of God already at work in them. And then 2 weeks ago, we talked about how service helps us see ourselves. That despite what we might hear from the world, service helps us realize that each of us are gifted by God for the good of the world. That we're called to call out gifts in others, and that in using our gifts in service, we build our capacity for hope. And as we conclude our discussion on service this week, on our day of service event, we're going to be talking about how serving helps us see the church. Because friends, if you have been here even 5 minutes, you might know this is a church that serves. So the question isn't, do we serve? But why? And what happens when we serve? What is God doing in us? What truth about who we are as the church is revealed as we serve one another in our world? Those are our questions for us this morning. And so we are going to find some answers in the Word of God through the Apostle Paul in his letter to the early church in Corinth. So I invite you to take a moment with me in 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. Hear now God's holy word. It says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it a less part of a body. And if the ear would say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as God chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. In those members of the body we think as less honorable, we clothe with greater honor. And our less respectable members we treat with greater respect. Whereas our members more respectable do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. If you have ever served with a group, you might quickly realize that each of us are blessed with different gifts. When we gather together to complete a project or serve our neighbors, it can become very clear who has some kinds of gifts and who has others. For example, in our sanctuary this morning, we have laid out all kinds of pillowcases made by our quilters for patients at Cook's Children's Hospital. They made those together at our quilters camp this week, and it was a joy to recognize those gifts, the impact that they'll have. Can I share with y'all this morning, my friends, those are not my gifts. I didn't even get to count squares this year. Or later, as we, as a church, serve around the community, a few of our very brave and kind-hearted souls have agreed to help clean up our river in the back part of our property. They are going to be using some chainsaws to clear away the brush and then to haul it away. Those are not my gifts. I wasn't offered a chainsaw even once. And last week, we had our amazing church garage sale, and I saw so many gifts on display. I saw people greeting who I am sure gave hospitality its name. I saw people styling clothes for people in our community coming in looking for new things to wear. I saw people counting money without error. I saw enough work from Dave and Linda Boyd to ensure that they have my vote for bishop if that ever becomes possible. And I will say our district superintendent is here, so feel free to let him know that as well. But I saw so many dazzling gifts on display, and I was also reminded of all the gifts I don't have. For example, at the very end of the day, one woman came in and she was collecting her treasures, and I got to help her out to her car. And part of what she had bought from our garage sale was a bike for her grandson. And so I got to help her put that bike into the car. We lifted the trunk, and we were preparing to get that in there. I did my best. I lifted it up, and I placed it in. It did not fit. And so I tried to adjust it a little bit, and I tried again. It did not fit. And I tried a couple more times. I actually won't tell you how many times I tried. No one needs that. But as I was ready to truly give up on this whole process, one of our church members drives up, walks up behind me, and says, "You should flip it upside down." So I flipped it upside down, and I put it in the trunk. Y'all, it fit like a glove. I could live 100 lifetimes and never have thought to turn it upside down to get it to fit. Don't put me on your team for Tetris. It's not my gift. In the church that Paul is writing to, a group of folks from all across Corinth with different social statuses, different economic situations, different backgrounds, they know, just like we do, that we all have different gifts. But where Paul is guiding them to learn is that each of those gifts matter equally to God, that they are made better by one another. At the time of Paul's writing, the phrase "many members, one body" was growing in usage. And it was meant to convey a singular idea that the whole, a group or a family or a gathering, was made up of many pieces that came to form it together. That somehow in their togetherness, they might even be greater. Except that at the time of this writing, this phrase was used to convey that the way that holds true, the way that we are better together, is if every person remembers their place. If they don't get any ideas, if they maintain their status, then we can be many members in one body. And here Paul uses the same phrase, but he completely reinvents it. He takes the idea of many members, one body, and he doesn't ask the members of the church to maintain the status they came into the group with. He doesn't ask them to remember their place. Instead, he reminds them that they are all given a new place together at the foot of the cross. And that in itself reveals a truth about the church, that each of us are made better by the gifts of one another. These equally valuable gifts make each of us better. But I wonder if there's a deeper truth about the church revealed in service that Paul is inviting us to consider. In his book, The Deeply Formed Life, Rich Velotis, a pastor of a growing multicultural church in Queens, tells the story of a seminar he took in college. As part of his grade, each student in the class was assigned a book to read, and then on the day of their assignment, they would stand up and give a 30-minute presentation over the contents of that book. Easy enough. And so on the day of Rich's presentation, he was ready. He had his notes prepared, he had his slides. There was just one problem. He hadn't read the book. He had read the dust jacket. He'd read the table of contents. He'd read some reviews of it. But the actual book in itself, not so much. Nevertheless, his presentation begins. And it's going pretty well. He's moving through the content. He's answering some questions. He gets to about the 10-minute mark, and his professor stops him. In front of the whole group, he asks, "Rich, you didn't read that book, did you?" And he responds, No, I did not." And then the professor asks him to finish the presentation. And he does. So after class, the professor naturally pulls Rich aside. This young person, 20-something, with his book bag over his shoulder, speaks to his professor, and he shares a word of wisdom with him. He says, "Rich, you have a gift. You can give a 30-minute presentation based on the dust cover of a book. Rich, you have a curse." He says, "You will be tempted to believe you can live your life off your gifts and not do the deeper work of character formation. Your gifts can only take you so far. The real work is deeper." And I wonder if the same wasn't true for the Corinthian church. Paul shares with them that yes, their gifts fit together, each of which are equally valuable. But maybe even more valuable is remembering that we ourselves fit together, that we are created by God to belong together. Returning to his words in verse 18, Paul writes, "But as it is, God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. When we serve, we expect that it will reveal what kinds of gifts that we have. And that's true. But equally true is that service reveals what kind of community we are called to be. Paul shares with the Corinthians that it's not just that you are made better by one another's gifts. When we live out our call as the church, we recognize this new community made possible by Christ's life, death, and resurrection. God gifts us to one another. That we are not just made better by one another, but that we, in fact, need one another. More than just what our gifts can provide. And my friends, the same is true of us. In a world that invites us to believe the lie that we can do all things on our own, when have you found yourself in that sacred space of realizing that we do, in fact, need each other? That we were created that way. Maybe it was when you were dealing with loss. Maybe it was when you were facing an unknown future or trying to make a difficult decision. Maybe it was when you felt alone or you needed a little help to get by. Maybe it was when you served someone else and you saw your own needs reflected in them. Friends, our world invites us to believe that we are given independence, this idea that we can do all things on our own. God has given us something better. God gives us interdependence. I know that can't be our turtle on the roof because he's not allowed anymore. Let's hope it's just the AC. But friends, we're given that interdependence, that reliance on one another, knowing that it's there that we live out the kind of community God has called us to, in which we are gifted and entrusted with one another. A few years ago, I was ready to begin my last year of seminary. And so to celebrate, a few friends and I bought some dangerously cheap tickets to California, and we flew all the way out there and we did our best to hit every national park that we could. But what you might find is that if you get enough seminarians together, even vacation can become Bible study. And so we were walking down the road in a national park one day, and my friend was asking, where do you see God most easily? And she answered the question by saying it was in places of nature. It was in places like we were walking through. Places where she could see those trees stretch up to the sky, where she could see the glory of God revealed in creation. We're so fun to go on vacation with. And then she asked me the same question. Where do you see God most easily? And I responded with the church, the group of people coming together to worship and live and serve together. And there was no right answer to that question. But I think that we were actually giving the same answer. Because the church is a lot like those redwood trees that we saw. Through powers outside their control, the rain and sun and nutrients, they stretched up toward the heavens. But they don't reach those heights alone. You might think with trees that tall that they would have deep roots, so they would hold fast as they stretched up toward the sky. But instead, we find that they reach those amazing heights not by being planted deeply into the ground, but by being deeply interwoven. And so it is with the church. When we serve, we announce the world that God is bringing to fruition all around us is here. We reveal not just the kind of gifts that we have, but the kind of community God has given us. One in which we believe we are created to be with one another, to serve one another, to announce that we believe our neighbor is worth our service, to resist the lie that we can do it alone, and to live into God's truth, that we are gifted to one another. Friends, where are you being called to resist the lie that we can do it all alone? Where are you being called to serve with and within your community? Where are you being invited to live out God's truth that each of us is dependent on God and one another, knowing that when we do so, we become living invitations, not just to a community that's celebrating 100 years, but to a kingdom that's without end. May it ever be so.